He means nothing to me anymore, Elise promised, her green eyes meeting mine across our kitchen table. The morning light filtered through our Baltimore row house windows, casting shadows that seemed to dance between us like the lies I suspected were coming. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into patterns that reminded me of smoke signals. After 15 years of marriage, you learn to read the spaces between words. Elise had that particular tone she used when she was trying to convince herself as much as me. Nothing at all? I asked, keeping my voice level. My name is Nick Harper, and I've been a marine engineer for 20 years. You learn patience in my line of work. You also learn that when something looks unstable, it usually is. Brett was just a phase, she continued, running her manicured fingers through her blonde hair. A stupid mistake when we were having problems last year. You know that. Brett Paxton. Her boss at the law firm where she worked as a litigation paralegal. The guy drove a BMW M5 and wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I'd met him at office parties, watched him work the room like he owned it. The kind of man who made other men feel small just by existing. I believe you, I said, though my gut was telling me otherwise. 15 years of marriage had taught me when to pick my battles. This wasn't the moment for confrontation. Elise smiled, the tension leaving her shoulders. Good. Because I love you, Nick. Only you. I nodded and finished my coffee, then kissed her forehead before heading to my office. The taste of her lies lingered in my mouth like bitter medicine. My engineering firm occupied a converted warehouse near the harbor. Nothing fancy, but we did good work designing marine systems for commercial vessels. The smell of salt water and industrial lubricants was more honest than the perfume-scented deception I'd left at home. You look like someone stole your lunch money, Bob Martinez said as I walked past his drafting table. Bob was my business partner and the closest thing I had to a best friend. Puerto Rican, built like a linebacker, with a sense of humor darker than Baltimore's winter skies. Marriage counseling session over breakfast, I replied, settling into my chair. The familiar hum of computers and the distant sound of harbor traffic helped steady my nerves. Elise still talking about that pretty boy lawyer? She says he means nothing to her anymore. Bob snorted. Yeah, and I'm the Pope. You want my advice? Not particularly. Trust your instincts, Nick. You've got good radar for structural problems. People aren't that different from buildings. When the foundation starts cracking, you notice. I spent the day reviewing blueprints for a new cargo vessel, but my mind kept wandering. Elise had been distant for months. Late nights at the office, weekend conferences that seemed to multiply, phone calls she took in other rooms. The classic signs that every married man learns to recognize and most choose to ignore. That evening, I stopped at Murphy's Tavern on my way home. The bar was a Baltimore institution, the kind of place where dock workers and office managers drank the same beer and complained about the same things. The bartender, Danny, had been pouring drinks there since the Carter administration. The usual? Danny asked as I claimed a stool at the end of the bar. Make it a double. 3 stools down, I recognized Tamara Walsh, Elise's best friend since college. Tammy was a real estate agent with a mouth bigger than the Chesapeake Bay and a talent for gossip that bordered on professional. She was talking to another woman I didn't recognize, but their conversation carried clearly in the tavern's acoustic sweet spot. Elise is glowing lately, Tammy was saying. Haven't seen her this happy in years. Really? I thought she and Nick were having problems. They are, but she's got something on the side that's keeping her satisfied. Brett Paxton from her firm. Gorgeous man. Drives that beautiful BMW. Takes her to places Nick never could afford. My grip tightened on the whiskey glass. The amber liquid suddenly tasted like ashes. Isn't he married? Was. Divorced last month. Elise thinks he might be getting serious about her. She's practically floating on air when she talks about him. The woman leaned closer. What about Nick? Tammy shrugged. What about him? He's a good provider, but let's be honest. He's not exactly exciting. Works with boats and machinery all day, comes home smelling like motor oil. Brett takes her to wine tastings and art galleries. It's not even a contest. I finished my drink and left $20 on the bar, walking out into the humid Baltimore evening. The harbor smelled like low tide and broken promises. At home, Elise was in the living room watching television. She'd changed into yoga pants and one of my old Navy t-shirts, looking younger than her 36 years. For a moment, I could almost forget what I'd heard at Murphy's. How was work? She asked, without looking away from the screen. Productive. Finished the Morrison project. That's nice. We fell into our evening routine like actors who'd performed the same play too many times. Dinner, small talk about her day at the law firm, careful conversation that avoided any topic that might lead to conflict. She mentioned Brett exactly once, complaining about his unreasonable deadlines. By 11 o'clock, we were in bed. Elise fell asleep quickly, her breathing settling into the rhythm I'd listened to for 15 years. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting. At 2:17 a.m., her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen illuminated in the darkness, and I saw his name clearly. Brett P. Elise stirred but didn't wake. Her phone buzzed again, then again. I watched the light pulse like a heartbeat, each flash another nail in the coffin of our marriage. I didn't reach for the phone, didn't wake her up for an explanation, didn't start the fight that would have felt so justified in that moment. Instead, I did what 15 years of marriage and 20 years of engineering had taught me to do. I started planning. The next morning, Elise was unusually cheerful at breakfast, humming while she made coffee. She checked her phone several times, smiling at messages I couldn't see. Sleep well? I asked. Like a baby. You? Perfect. After she left for work, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and began what I privately called Operation Erasure Protocol. If Elise wanted to pretend Brett meant nothing while conducting a full-scale affair, she was welcome to her fantasy. But I wasn't going to be a supporting actor in her drama anymore. The first step was financial reconnaissance. I logged into our joint accounts and began documenting every transaction, every automatic payment, every shared asset. 15 years of marriage creates a complex web of financial entanglements, but I'd always been good with numbers. We had 3 joint checking accounts, 2 savings accounts, and a money market fund. The house was in both our names, but I'd made the down payment from my Navy savings. Maryland was an equitable distribution state, which meant assets acquired during marriage were split fairly, not necessarily equally. I called Tim Brennan, an old college friend who'd become a divorce attorney. We'd kept in touch over the years, mostly Christmas cards and the occasional beer when he was in Baltimore. Nick Harper, Tim said when his secretary put me through. This is unexpected. Please tell me you're not calling for professional reasons. I wish I could. I'm sorry to hear that. How can I help? I need to understand my options. Hypothetically. Hypothetically, of course. What's the situation? I gave him the basics without mentioning names or specific details. 15-year marriage, no children, joint assets, suspected infidelity. Maryland allows no-fault divorce, Tim explained. You don't need to prove adultery, just irreconcilable differences. But if you can document infidelity, it might affect alimony calculations. What about asset protection? Tricky territory. You can't hide assets or transfer them to avoid division, but you can protect yourself from future financial liability. Close joint credit cards, separate bank accounts, document everything. How long does the process take? Uncontested? 6 months minimum? Contested? Could be years. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the sounds of our neighborhood. Mrs. Dallow next door was gardening, her radio playing old country songs. Somewhere down the block, children were laughing in a backyard. Normal sounds of normal lives that weren't falling apart at 2 a.m. text messages. That afternoon, I opened a new checking account at a different bank. Just Nick Harper, no joint ownership. I transferred exactly half of our liquid savings, documenting everything with photographs and printed statements, not hiding assets, just protecting what was mine. Over the next week, I began the slow process of extracting myself from our shared life. I changed my direct deposit to the new account, updated my emergency contacts at work, removing Elise and adding Bob instead, started forwarding my mail to a P.O. box. Elise didn't notice. She was too busy with her secret happiness, too distracted by whatever Brett was promising her in those 2 a.m. text messages. On Friday evening, she announced she was going out with Tammy for dinner and drinks. Girls' night out, she called it, something she'd been doing more frequently lately. "Don't wait up," she said, kissing my cheek. "We'll probably make a late night of it. Have fun." After she left, I walked through our house like a tourist in my own life. 15 years of accumulated memories, wedding photos on the mantle, vacation souvenirs from trips to Ocean City and Virginia Beach, furniture we'd chosen together when we still believed in forever. In the bedroom, I noticed things I'd been too distracted to see before. New lingerie in her drawer, still with tags attached. Expensive perfume I'd never smelled on her at home. A second phone charger on her side of the bed, though she claimed to have only one phone. I didn't search through her belongings or install spy software or hire a private investigator. I didn't need to. The evidence was everywhere once you knew how to look for it. Elise came home at 3 a.m., slipping into bed with the careful movements of someone trying not to wake their spouse. She smelled like wine and cologne that wasn't mine. "How was dinner?" I asked quietly. She jumped. "I thought you were asleep." "Just dozed off. Good time with Tammy?" "Yes. We went to that new place in Federal Hill. Very nice. Glad you enjoyed it." She curled up on her side of the bed, and within minutes her breathing settled into sleep. I lay awake until dawn, making final plans. The second week of my private investigation began on a Monday morning that felt like the first day of a different life. Elise was in the shower, singing something I didn't recognize, while I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and laptop. Her phone was charging on the counter, forgotten in her rush to get ready for work. The screen lit up with a text message, and I could see the preview without touching anything. "Can't stop thinking about last night. You were incredible." From Brett P., of course. I memorized the timestamp and went back to my computer. Over the weekend, I'd created a detailed spreadsheet documenting every suspicious behavior, every late night, every unexplained absence. Not for court purposes, but for my own sanity. Engineers like data. It helps us understand structural failures. "You're up early," Elise said, emerging from the bathroom in her robe. Her hair was still damp, and she looked younger somehow, like the woman I'd married 15 years ago. "Couldn't sleep. Big project deadline coming up." She retrieved her phone, glanced at the message, and smiled. "Anything interesting happening at work today?" "The usual. Maritime engineering isn't exactly thrilling." "No, I suppose not." She disappeared into the bedroom to get dressed, and I heard her typing on her phone. Quick, practiced fingers, sending replies to messages I'd never see. At the office, Bob noticed my mood immediately. "You look like a man with a plan," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Usually that means trouble." "Just organizing some personal business." "The kind that involves lawyers?" I'd known Bob for 8 years. He had an intuitive understanding of stress patterns in both steel and people. "Maybe. You want to talk about it?" "Not yet." "Fair enough. But when you're ready, I'm here. And I know people. Good people, if you need them." Bob's network of contacts was legendary. Former Navy guys, union workers, small business owners who'd learned to take care of their own. The kind of men who understood loyalty and didn't ask too many questions. That afternoon, I drove past Elise's law firm during lunch hour. The building was a converted warehouse in Harbor East, all exposed brick and industrial windows trying to look sophisticated. Brett's BMW was in the parking lot, gleaming silver under the autumn sun. I didn't park or go inside, just drove past, gathering information the way I'd gather data on a structural inspection. Brett worked late most nights, according to Elise. His car was usually gone by the time I drove past on my way home from work, except on Wednesdays. On Wednesdays, his car was still there at 7 p.m., and Elise texted me about working late on depositions. Pattern recognition is a useful skill. That evening, Elise was distracted during dinner, checking her phone frequently and smiling at messages she didn't share. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just work stuff. Brett's got us all scrambling on this new case." "Sounds stressful." "It is, but it's exciting too. High-profile client, lots of media attention. If we win, it could really boost everyone's career." "Including Brett's?" "Especially Brett's. He's brilliant, Nick, really brilliant. The way he approaches legal strategy is like watching an artist work." The admiration in her voice was unmistakable. She talked about Brett the way she used to talk about her favorite professors in college, with a mixture of respect and fascination that bordered on worship. "He sounds impressive." "He is. I'm lucky to work for him." After dinner, I retreated to my home office to work on project specifications for a new tugboat design. The familiar rhythm of calculations and technical drawings helped quiet the noise in my head. Around 10 p.m., Elise appeared in the doorway. "I'm going to bed," she announced. "Don't stay up too late." "Just finishing this section." She kissed the top of my head, a gesture that once would have felt loving but now felt like obligation. "Good night." I waited until I heard her bedroom door close, then opened a new browser window and began researching Brett Paxton. Social media profiles, professional listings, public records. The internet makes privacy almost impossible if you know where to look. Brett was 44, divorced 6 months ago, no children. His ex-wife was named Monica, and according to her Facebook page, she'd moved to Richmond after their divorce. The split looked amicable from the outside, but divorce records told a different story. Monica Paxton had filed for divorce citing adultery and emotional cruelty. She'd requested and received a restraining order that was later dropped. The settlement gave her the house in Annapolis and half of Brett's retirement accounts. Interesting pattern. I spent another hour documenting everything I'd found, adding it to my growing file of information about my wife's lover. Knowledge is power, and power would be useful in the coming weeks. The next morning, Elise announced she'd be working late again. "Big deposition tomorrow," she explained, not meeting my eyes. "Brett wants everyone to stay and prepare." "Of course he does." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just seems like he demands a lot of overtime from his staff. He's thorough. That's why he's successful. I'm sure that's part of it." She gave me a sharp look but didn't pursue the conversation. After she left for work, I called in sick and spent the day implementing the next phase of my plan. First stop, the bank. I met with a financial advisor and restructured my retirement accounts, removing Elise as beneficiary and replacing her with my nephew Jimmy, my sister's son who was studying engineering at Virginia Tech. The advisor didn't ask questions, just processed the paperwork with professional discretion. Next, I visited my insurance agent and made similar changes to my life insurance policies. Again, perfectly legal and within my rights, but it would complicate Elise's financial future considerably. By afternoon, I was at Tim Brennan's law office in downtown Baltimore. His practice occupied 2 floors of a renovated brownstone, with a kind of understated elegance that suggested competence without ostentation. "You look terrible," Tim said when his secretary showed me into his office. "Thanks, I feel worse." "Tell me what's happening." I laid out everything I'd discovered over the past 2 weeks. The text messages, the pattern of late nights, the overheard conversations at Murphy's Tavern. Tim listened without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad. "How do you want to handle this?" he asked when I finished. "I want to disappear." Legally speaking, that's complicated. You can't just abandon your marital responsibilities. I don't mean literally disappear. I mean extract myself from the marriage so completely that when she finally decides to choose between me and Brett, there's no choice left to make. Tim leaned back in his chair, studying me with the careful attention of a lawyer evaluating a client's chances in court. That's actually brilliant. Legally risky, but brilliant. How risky? If you're too aggressive about asset protection, a judge might view it as dissipation of marital property. But if you're careful, if you only protect what you can legitimately claim as separate property, I've been documenting everything. Good. Keep doing that. And Nick, don't do anything stupid. Don't confront her. Don't hire a private investigator to get photos. Don't try to catch them together. Just protect yourself and let her make her own choices. What if she chooses him? Then you'll be prepared. What if she chooses you? I considered the question for a long moment. I don't think that's possible anymore. Too much has happened. Fair enough. But keep your options open until you're sure. That evening, Elise came home at midnight with the excuse I'd expected. Depositions ran late. Everyone grabbed drinks afterward to decompress. She'd taken a cab home because she'd had too much wine. How did it go? I asked from the living room where I'd been reading. Exhausting, but productive. Brett thinks we have a real chance of winning this case. That's great. She sat down next to me on the couch, closer than she'd been in weeks. I'm sorry I've been so distracted lately. This case is consuming everything. I understand. Do you? Because sometimes I feel like we're living parallel lives, like we're roommates instead of husband and wife. The irony was overwhelming. Maybe we should talk about that. Maybe we should, but not tonight. I'm too tired to think straight. She went upstairs, and I heard the shower running for a long time. When she finally came to bed, she curled up against me like she used to when we were newlyweds. I love you, Nick, she whispered in the darkness. I know. Do you love me? The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I love who you used to be. She was quiet for so long, I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, what does that mean? It means people change. Sometimes they change into someone you don't recognize. Have I changed that much? You tell me. But she didn't answer, and eventually her breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep. I lay awake until dawn, listening to her dreams and planning my disappearance. The morning I vanished was unremarkable in every way except one. It was the last morning Elise would wake up married. There was no thunder, no argument, no cinematic confrontation to mark the moment. The world outside our bedroom window looked exactly as it always had, gray and indifferent, the city slowly preparing for another ordinary day. Only I knew that everything was about to change, that by nightfall the life she thought she controlled would already be slipping out of her grasp. I'd been planning this moment for 3 weeks, but the final trigger came at 1:47 a.m. when her phone buzzed with a message that made her smile in her sleep. It was a small thing, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. She didn't wake up, didn't reach for the phone, just shifted slightly and smiled. The kind of soft, private smile she used to reserve for me years ago. Even unconscious, she was more responsive to Brett than she'd been to me in months. That single expression erased any lingering doubt I might have had about what I was doing. I lay awake after that, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe. By the time the alarm would normally have gone off, I already felt detached, like I was observing the end of something rather than living inside it. I slipped out of bed at 5:30, dressed quietly in the bathroom, and carried my single packed bag to the kitchen. I moved slowly, deliberately, making sure nothing rattled or scraped. Everything important fit into one duffel bag: clothes for a week, important documents, my laptop, and a few personal items that couldn't be replaced. The rest, furniture, decorations, shared clutter, could stay behind. None of it mattered anymore. The house felt different in the pre-dawn darkness, like a place I'd visited once but never really lived, familiar but hollow. The walls didn't feel hostile or comforting, just irrelevant. 15 years of marriage reduced to shadows and silence, to rooms that no longer felt like they belonged to me. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, where Elise would be sure to find it. The metal clicked softly against the granite, louder than it should have been in the quiet room. No note, no explanation, no dramatic farewell speech, just an absence where a husband used to be. She would wake up to questions with no immediate answers, and that was intentional. My truck was parked 3 blocks away, where I'd moved it the night before. I locked the front door behind me for the last time and walked through the empty street, the air cool and damp against my skin. The engine turned over quietly, and I drove through empty Baltimore streets toward my new temporary life, stopping at red lights no one else was waiting at, passing buildings that had no idea they were witnessing a disappearance. The extended stay motel in Glen Burnie was exactly as anonymous as I'd hoped. Clean, functional, forgettable. Beige walls, generic art, the faint smell of industrial cleaner. I'd paid for 2 weeks in cash and registered under my middle name, Thomas. The desk clerk had been more interested in his crossword puzzle than my identification, barely glancing up as he handed me the key. Room 237 became my command center. I dropped the bag on the bed, closed the curtains halfway, and set up my laptop on the small table by the window. I connected to the motel's Wi-Fi using a VPN service Bob had recommended and tested the connection twice. From the outside, I'd simply evaporated. No forwarding address, no digital trail she could easily follow. At 7:15 a.m., my old phone received its first call. Elise's number appeared on the screen, and I watched it ring until voicemail picked up. There was something strangely calming about not answering, about letting the sound stop on its own. She called again at 7:18, then 7:22, then continuously until I finally powered the device off and removed the battery, setting both pieces on opposite sides of the room. My new phone, purchased with cash 3 days earlier, remained silent. That silence felt earned. I spent the morning monitoring the digital breadcrumbs of my former life. Email accounts I'd closed, social media profiles I'd deactivated, automatic payments I'd canceled. I logged into banking portals, verified balances, changed credentials one final time. Every connection between Nick Harper and the world had been severed, except for the ones I controlled. Watching it happen was oddly satisfying, like shutting down a machine that had been running too long without maintenance. At 10:30, Tim Brennan called my new number. "She's been calling my office for an hour," he said without preamble. "Wants to know if you're here, if I've heard from you, if you're planning to hurt yourself." What did you tell her? That client communications are confidential and she should contact you directly if she has concerns. Good. She sounds genuinely panicked, Nick. Are you sure about this approach? Completely sure. There was a pause on the line. All right, but be careful. Desperate people make unpredictable choices. By noon, Elise had escalated to calling my office. Bob fielded the first call with professional courtesy, explaining that I wasn't available and suggesting she try my cell phone. The second call, 20 minutes later, got a different response. "Look, lady," Bob told her, according to the text message he sent me, "your husband is a grown man. If he doesn't want to talk to you, maybe you should think about why." Bob had never liked Elise. He thought she was pretentious and demanding, always complaining about our modest lifestyle while contributing nothing to improve it. His loyalty to me was absolute, and his discretion was reliable. I trusted him not to soften the truth for her comfort. The afternoon brought more desperate attempts at contact. Elise called my sister in Virginia, my parents in Florida, even my old Navy buddies whose numbers she'd found in my address book. None of them had heard from me, and all of them told her the same thing. If Nick wanted to be found, he'd make himself available. Each blocked path tightened the circle around her, shrinking her options. At 4 p.m., she showed up at my office. Bob called me immediately. She's here. Wants to search your desk? Says you might have left a suicide note or something equally dramatic. What's she wearing? What kind of question is that? Just curious. That black dress she wears to court, the one that makes her look like a lawyer instead of a paralegal. She's got her professional face on, trying to intimidate me with legal authority she doesn't actually have. Don't let her touch anything. Already handled. Told her this is private property, and she's not welcome without your permission. How did she react? Like a woman who's not used to people saying no. Lots of threats about calling police and lawyers and anyone else who might care. The police won't care. It's not illegal to leave your wife. That's what I told her. After Bob hung up, I sat in my anonymous motel room and tried to imagine Elise's state of mind. For 15 years, I'd been a reliable constant in her life. The steady husband who paid bills and fixed things and never asked difficult questions. My sudden absence would feel like losing gravity. Good. At 6 p.m., she called Tim's office again. This time she demanded to speak with him directly, claiming spousal privilege and threatening to report him to the state bar for hiding a missing person. Tim called me afterward, laughing. She's lost her mind, completely lost it. Spousal privilege doesn't work that way, and even if it did, you're not missing. You're just unavailable. Did she mention Brett? Interesting you should ask. She specifically said she needed to find you because there were rumors at her office about her having an affair, and she needed to present a united front with her husband. Rumors. That's what she called them. I got the impression someone at her law firm is asking uncomfortable questions. The law firm. I'd almost forgotten about that aspect of the situation. Elise worked in a conservative environment where appearance mattered as much as competence. A paralegal having an affair with her married boss would be gossip gold, especially if the paralegal's husband had mysteriously disappeared. That evening I drove past our house for the first time since leaving. Elise's car was in the driveway, and every light in the house was on. She was probably calling everyone we'd ever met, trying to construct a search party for a man who didn't want to be found. The irony was perfect. For months, she'd been living a secret life, sneaking around behind my back, conducting an affair while playing the role of devoted wife. Now I was the one with secrets, and she was the one left wondering what was real. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nick, this is Tammy Walsh. Elise is worried sick about you. Please call her." I deleted the message without responding. Another text, different number. "Mr. Harper, this is Monica Paxton. I think we should talk." Now that was interesting. Brett's ex-wife had somehow gotten my new number and wanted a conversation. I saved her contact information but didn't respond immediately. Some conversations required preparation. The next morning brought a new development. Bob called with an update from the office. 2 cops showed up an hour ago, he reported. Elise filed a missing person report. They wanted to search your desk and computer. What did you tell them? That you're not missing, you're just not talking to your wife. Showed them the work you completed yesterday remotely, proved you're alive and functioning. They weren't happy about wasting their time. She filed a false report? Technically, yes. But they're not going to charge her unless you push it. They just told her that marital problems don't constitute a missing person case. The police visit would be public record, which meant Elise's colleagues at the law firm would hear about it. Her carefully maintained professional image was starting to crack. That afternoon, I called Monica Paxton. "Thank you for calling back," she said. Her voice was crisp, professional, with a slight southern accent. "I assume you know who I am." "Brett's ex-wife. Among other things, I heard through mutual friends that your wife has gone missing, and I thought you might benefit from some information about my former husband." "I'm listening." "Brett has a pattern. He targets married women in subordinate positions, usually paralegals or junior associates. The power dynamic appeals to him. He makes them feel special, chosen, superior to their boring husbands." "How many times has he done this?" "That I know of? 4, including your wife. The pattern is always the same. Lots of attention, expensive gifts, promises of a future together. Then, when the woman leaves her husband or gets caught, Brett loses interest and moves on to the next target. What happened with you? I caught him with my best friend. Filed for divorce the next day. But I was lucky. I had my own career, my own money, my own life. These paralegals he seduces, they give up everything for him, and then he throws them away. Why are you telling me this? Because Brett destroyed my marriage, but he didn't destroy me. Your wife is about to learn a very painful lesson, and I thought you should know what's coming. You think he'll dump her? I think he already has. The missing husband drama is probably more excitement than he bargained for. Brett likes his affairs simple and discreet. Public scandal makes him nervous. After hanging up, I sat in my motel room and considered this new information. If Monica was right, Elise wasn't just losing her husband. She was about to lose her lover, too. The life she'd been building in secret was about to collapse from both directions. My phone buzzed with another unknown number. This is Brett Paxton. We need to talk. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. No, we don't. His reply came immediately. Your wife is having a breakdown. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. My wife is your problem now. That's not how this works. That's exactly how this works. I blocked his number and turned off my phone. Brett Paxton could solve his own problems. I was done being the reliable husband who fixed everything. That evening, I drove past the house again. This time, Brett's BMW was in the driveway next to Elise's car. Through the living room window, I could see them talking, their body language tense and animated. I parked across the street and watched for 20 minutes. Brett left first, his departure abrupt and angry. Elise followed him to the door, but he didn't look back. Monica had been right. The missing husband drama was too much excitement for Brett's taste. He was already pulling away, leaving Elise to deal with the consequences of their affair alone. I drove back to my motel with something that felt almost like satisfaction. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one cleaning up someone else's mess. The law firm's human resources investigation began on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after I'd vanished from Elise's life. I learned about it from Tim, who heard about it from a contact at the Maryland State Bar Association. Someone filed a complaint about workplace harassment, Tim told me during our morning phone call. Harassment, specifically. The complaint alleges that a senior attorney has been engaging in inappropriate relationships with subordinate staff members. Someone filed a complaint against Brett? The complaint is anonymous, but it specifically mentions Brett Paxton and includes detailed information about his relationship with a paralegal whose husband recently disappeared under suspicious circumstances. I hadn't filed the complaint, but I had a good idea who had. Monica Paxton was proving to be a valuable ally in ways I hadn't expected. What happens next? Internal investigation, probably. The law firm will want to protect itself from liability. If they find evidence of harassment or inappropriate conduct, they'll have to take action. What kind of action? Depends on what they find. Suspension, termination, professional discipline. These things tend to escalate quickly once they start. The investigation would be confidential, but law firms were notorious gossip mills. By lunchtime, everyone in the office would know that Brett was under scrutiny, and everyone would be speculating about which paralegal was involved. I spent the morning researching the law firm's policies and procedures. Like most professional organizations, they had strict rules about workplace relationships and zero tolerance for harassment. Brett's position as a senior partner wouldn't protect him if the evidence was compelling. At noon, my new phone rang with a call from Bob. "You need to see this," he said without preamble. "I'm sending you a link." The link led to a Facebook post from Tammy Walsh, Elise's gossipy best friend. The post was a rambling plea for information about my whereabouts, complete with a recent photo of me and dramatic language about a missing husband and a wife's desperate search. The comments section was brutal. Friends and acquaintances who knew both Elise and me were asking pointed questions about why a husband would disappear so suddenly. Several people mentioned seeing Elise with another man at various restaurants and social events. "She's making this very public," Bob observed when I called him back. "That's a mistake. For her, maybe. For you, it's perfect. She's destroying her own credibility." Bob was right. Every public plea for help, every dramatic social media post, every call to police and lawyers was creating a permanent record of Elise's behavior. When the truth about her affair eventually came out, the contrast between her public performance and her private actions would be devastating. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at my motel. I was reviewing engineering specifications when someone knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s, professional attire, confident posture. "Mr. Harper, I'm Detective Sarah Chen with Baltimore County Police. Could we talk for a moment?" I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "About what?" "Your wife filed a missing person report. I'm following up to verify that you're safe and acting voluntarily." "I'm safe. I'm acting voluntarily. I'm not missing. I'm just not available to my wife." Detective Chen studied me with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every variety of domestic drama. "Mind if I ask why?" "Marital problems? The kind that require you to disappear without notice? The kind that require me to protect myself from a situation that was becoming untenable. Are you planning to return home?" "No." "Are you planning to contact your wife?" "Through my attorney, when appropriate." Detective Chen nodded and made notes in a small notebook. "Your wife seems to think you might harm yourself." "My wife doesn't know me as well as she thinks she does." "Fair enough. Can I get a phone number where you can be reached if necessary?" I gave her Tim's office number. "My attorney handles all communications." After she left, I called Tim to give him a heads up about the police contact. "She's escalating," Tim observed. "Filing false reports, involving police, making public scenes. This is either genuine panic or calculated manipulation." "Does it matter which?" "Not really. Either way, she's creating evidence that will work in your favor if this goes to court." That evening, I decided to take a more active role in monitoring the situation. I drove to Harbor East and parked across from Elise's law firm, waiting for the end of the business day. At 6:15, employees began leaving the building. I recognized several faces from office parties and social events, but their body language was different now. Tense conversations in the parking lot, suspicious glances toward the building, the unmistakable atmosphere of workplace drama. Brett emerged at 6:45, walking quickly to his BMW with his head down. No confident swagger, no casual socializing with colleagues. He looked like a man trying to avoid attention. Elise appeared 10 minutes later, and the contrast was striking. While Brett seemed to be hiding, she was clearly performing. Loud phone conversation in the parking lot, dramatic gestures, obvious distress that seemed calculated to draw sympathy. I followed her at a distance as she drove home, then parked across the street to observe. She spent 20 minutes on the phone in her car before going inside, probably calling friends and family to update them on her latest crisis. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop watching me." Elise had spotted my truck. I started the engine and drove away, but not before sending a reply. "Stop lying to everyone." The next morning brought news that changed everything. Tim called with an update from his contact at the state bar. "The law firm suspended Brett pending investigation," he reported. "Paid leave, but he's banned from the office and all client contact." "What about Elise?" "Still employed, but under scrutiny. HR is interviewing everyone who works with Brett, and her name keeps coming up." "As what?" "As someone who had unusual access to Brett's office, worked late hours alone with him, and received preferential treatment on case assignments." The investigation was following exactly the pattern Monica had predicted. Brett's history of inappropriate relationships was becoming public knowledge, and Elise was being identified as his latest victim. Except she wasn't a victim. She was a willing participant who'd made calculated choices to betray her marriage for career advancement and personal gratification. The distinction mattered, especially to someone like me who dealt in evidence and accountability for a living. Sympathy depended on perception, and perception collapsed quickly under scrutiny. The victim narrative might work with her friends, whispered over coffee or defended in group chats, but it wouldn't survive professional scrutiny, sworn statements, or a timeline laid out without emotion. That afternoon, I received a call from Jimmy, my nephew at Virginia Tech. The caller ID made me pause. Family rarely called unless something was wrong. "Uncle Nick, Mom told me to call you. She's worried because Aunt Elise has been calling everyone looking for you." "I'm fine, Jimmy. Just dealing with some personal issues." I kept my voice even, not wanting to pull him into adult messes he didn't deserve. "Are you getting divorced?" Jimmy was 22 and studying engineering like his uncle. He had the directness that came with technical training and the loyalty that came with family bonds. No dancing around the subject, no emotional hedging, just a clean question. "Probably." "Good. She always treated you like garbage. We all saw it." The bluntness startled me more than the content. "Your family never liked her?" "We were polite, but she always acted like she was too good for family gatherings, too sophisticated for our conversations. Made you seem smaller somehow." He hesitated, then added, "Like she was doing you a favor by being married to you." It was interesting to hear an outside perspective on my marriage. I'd been so focused on the immediate betrayal that I'd forgotten about the years of subtle disrespect and social climbing that had preceded it. The dismissive smiles, the eye rolls, the way she corrected me in public and praised me in private, just enough to keep the imbalance intact. "Thanks for calling, Jimmy. Tell your mom I'm okay." "Will do. And Uncle Nick, whatever you're planning, I hope it works." That evening, I drove past the house one more time. I told myself it was for closure, but it was really about confirmation. Brett's car wasn't there, but Tammy's was. Through the window, I could see Elise and her best friend in animated conversation, hands moving, faces tense, probably strategizing about damage control, rehearsing explanations, deciding who to blame next. My phone buzzed with another Facebook notification. Tammy had posted an update about the missing husband situation, this time with more details about my erratic behavior and concerning mental state. The wording was careful, calculated to sound worried rather than accusatory. The comments section was even more brutal than before. Someone had shared screenshots of Elise at restaurants with Brett, asking pointed questions about the timeline of my disappearance. Another commenter mentioned seeing Brett's car at our house at unusual hours. A third wondered aloud why a woman with a supposedly missing husband had looked so relaxed at a wine bar the week before. The narrative was shifting. Instead of a worried wife searching for her missing husband, people were starting to see a cheating wife whose husband had discovered her affair and left. Once that door opened, it couldn't be closed again. I spent the next hour documenting everything. Screenshots of social media posts, photos of Brett's car at various locations, records of phone calls and text messages. Not for revenge, but for protection. I'd learned that the first casualty in conflicts like this was always the truth, and the only defense was meticulous record-keeping. When this situation finally exploded into open conflict, I wanted a complete record of everyone's behavior. My phone rang at 10 p.m. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Nick?" Elise's voice was strained, exhausted. "Please, we need to talk." "No, we don't." "Yes, we do. This has gone too far. People are saying terrible things, making assumptions. People are saying true things. That's different. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. Brett and I, it's complicated. It's simple. You chose him over me. Now you have him instead of me. He's not. Nick, he ended things. He said the situation was too complicated with you missing and the investigation at work. There it was. Monica had been right about Brett's pattern. When the affair became inconvenient, he'd abandoned Elise to deal with the consequences alone. The man she'd risked everything for had vanished the moment accountability entered the room. That's your problem now. Please come home. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out. You made your choice. I made a mistake. You made a series of choices over several months. Each one was a decision to value someone else more than your marriage. I love you. You love the security I provided. That's different. I hung up and turned off the phone. The conversation had confirmed what I'd suspected. Brett had already moved on, leaving Elise to face the social and professional consequences of their affair alone. She had neither her husband nor her lover, exactly what her choices had earned her. The law firm fired Elise on a Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after I'd disappeared from her life. I learned about it from Tim, who heard about it from his contact at the state bar, who heard about it from the HR director who'd conducted the investigation. Termination for violation of workplace conduct policies, Tim reported during our morning phone call. Specifically, engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a supervisor that created a hostile work environment for other employees. What about Brett? Forced resignation. They gave him the choice between being fired for cause or resigning with a neutral reference. He chose resignation. So they're both unemployed. Both unemployed, both professionally damaged, both facing potential disciplinary action from the state bar if any clients were affected by their conduct. The professional consequences were more severe than I'd expected. Elise had worked as a paralegal for 12 years, building a reputation and a network that would be difficult to replace. Brett's situation was even worse. As an attorney, his professional standing was everything. How long before this becomes public knowledge? It already is. Legal community in Baltimore is small. Everyone knows everyone else's business. I spent the morning researching employment law and professional discipline procedures. Both Elise and Brett would have difficulty finding new positions in their field. The legal community was notorious for gossip, and their affair had become the kind of scandal that followed people for years. At noon, Bob called with an update from my office. "Your wife showed up again," he reported. This time she looked different. Desperate, maybe, or angry. Hard to tell which. What did she want? To know where you're staying. Said she needs to talk to you about financial matters, bills that need to be paid, joint obligations. What did you tell her? Same thing I always tell her, that you're handling your business through your attorney and she should do the same. How did she react? Like someone who's not used to being told no by working-class guys like me. Got pretty aggressive, actually. Threatened to call the police, file harassment charges, report me to the Better Business Bureau. Bob's amusement was evident in his voice. After 20 years in construction and marine engineering, he wasn't easily intimidated by social pressure or empty legal threats. She's losing control of the situation, I observed. Yeah, and she doesn't like it. Used to be she could manipulate you into fixing her problems. Now she's got problems you can't fix and no access to you anyway. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from my sister in Virginia. "Nick, what the hell is going on?" Karen demanded without preamble. "Elise called Mom and Dad, crying about how you've abandoned her and she might lose the house." "She might lose the house. That's accurate. Are you really not going to help her?" "Help her with what? The consequences of her own choices?" Karen was quiet for a moment. She'd never liked Elise either, but family loyalty was complicated. "What did she do?" I gave her the basic facts without unnecessary details. The affair, the lies, the months of deception while pretending to be a devoted wife. "Oh," Karen said when I finished. "Oh, that changes things." "Does it?" "Nick, I'm sorry. I didn't know." She made it sound like you'd just lost your mind and disappeared. I did disappear, but not because I lost my mind. What are you going to do? Nothing. I'm going to do nothing and let her deal with the consequences of her choices. That's actually pretty smart. Cold, but smart. After hanging up, I realized that Elise's narrative was collapsing on multiple fronts. Her family and friends were starting to ask harder questions, her professional reputation was destroyed, and her lover had abandoned her when the situation became inconvenient. That evening, I drove past the house for what I planned to be the last time. A for sale sign had appeared in the front yard, confirming what I'd suspected. Without her job and without access to my income, Elise couldn't afford the mortgage payments. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The house is for sale. We need to discuss the proceeds. I recognized Elise's new phone number and saved it to my contacts, but didn't respond immediately. The house sale would require legal negotiations, which meant Tim would handle the communications. Another text. I know you're getting these messages. Please respond. Then another. Brett won't return my calls. I think he's seeing someone else. And another. I lost my job because of the investigation. I can't pay the bills. The messages continued for an hour, each one more desperate than the last. I read them all, but didn't respond. Elise was learning what it felt like to be ignored, to have your attempts at communication dismissed as unworthy of response. The final message was different. I understand why you left. I understand why you won't talk to me, but I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. I stared at that message for a long time before responding. Yes, you did. Every choice you made was intentional. Every lie you told was calculated. You meant for all of this to happen, you just didn't mean to get caught. Her response came immediately. That's not true. It's completely true. You wanted Brett and you wanted me, and you wanted to keep both of us without either of us knowing about the other. When that became impossible, you chose him. Now you have exactly what you chose. I chose wrong. You chose honestly. For the first time in months, you made a choice that reflected your actual priorities. I respect that choice, even if I don't like it. Can we meet? Just to talk? No. Why not? Because there's nothing to talk about. You made your decision, and I made mine. We're both living with the consequences. I turned off my phone and spent the evening reviewing my financial situation. The house sale would trigger property division negotiations, but I'd protected most of my assets through careful planning. Elise would get her legal share, but it wouldn't be enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd expected. The next morning brought news that surprised even me. Tim called with an update from his legal network. Brett Paxton was arrested last night, he reported. Domestic violence charges. Apparently he got into an altercation with his ex-wife. Monica? The same. She filed a restraining order 6 months ago, then dropped it. Filed another one last week after he started calling her and showing up at her workplace. What happened? According to the police report, he showed up at her apartment drunk and angry, demanding to know if she'd filed the complaint that got him fired. When she wouldn't let him in, he tried to force his way inside. Neighbors called police. The pattern was becoming clear. Brett's carefully constructed professional life was collapsing, and he was responding with increasingly erratic behavior. First, he'd abandoned Elise when their affair became inconvenient. Now he was harassing his ex-wife and facing criminal charges. What does this mean for Elise? Nothing legally, but it confirms what his ex-wife told you about his pattern of behavior. He uses women when it's convenient and discards them when it's not. I spent the afternoon researching Brett's arrest record and court filings. I pulled everything I could find: police reports, docket updates, preliminary hearing notes, and read through them slowly, carefully, like an engineer reviewing a stress test failure. The domestic violence charges were serious, not the kind that quietly disappeared with a fine and an apology. They involved prior complaints, documented injuries, and witness statements, potentially career-ending for an attorney. Even if he avoided conviction, the professional disciplinary board would likely suspend or revoke his license, if only to protect itself from association with someone so volatile. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a single bad night or a misunderstanding spun out of control. It was a pattern: escalation, intimidation, loss of control. Elise had tied her future to a man who was now facing criminal charges and professional ruin. Her judgment had been even worse than I'd realized. What she'd mistaken for confidence and intensity had always been something darker, something brittle beneath the surface. That evening, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I was tired, mentally drained, and not in the mood for another complication. But curiosity won, as it so often does when you sense unfinished business. Mr. Harper, this is Monica Paxton. I wanted to thank you. For what? For the information you provided about Brett's current situation. It helped me document his pattern of harassment and get the restraining order approved. I didn't provide any information. Your attorney did. Mr. Brennan contacted me last week with details about Brett's relationship with your wife and his behavior when that relationship ended. It established a pattern that supported my case. Tim had been busier than I'd realized. He must have connected dots I hadn't even thought to mention. I'm glad it helped. Brett is dangerous when he's cornered, she said, her voice steady but tight. He's lost his job, his reputation, his current girlfriend, and now he's facing criminal charges. Men like him don't handle failure well. Are you worried about your safety? I have the restraining order, and I've moved to a secure building, but I'm worried about your wife. She's the most accessible target for his anger. I hadn't considered that possibility. Not seriously. Brett's arrest suggested he was becoming unstable, and Elise was the most obvious person to blame for his current problems. The idea settled heavily in my chest. Should I warn her? That's your decision. But if something happens to her, you'll have to live with knowing you could have prevented it. After hanging up, I sat in my motel room and considered my options. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional car passing outside. I had no legal obligation to protect Elise from the consequences of her choices. The marriage was effectively over, but I also had no desire to see her physically harmed by a man whose instability she'd helped create, even indirectly. I sent her a text. Brett was arrested for domestic violence against his ex-wife. You should be careful. Her response came immediately. Are you worried about me? I'm providing information you should have. Thank you. Don't read more into it than what it is. I know, but thank you anyway. I turned off my phone and tried to focus on engineering specifications for a new project. Load tolerances, material constraints, timelines, things that obeyed logic and cause and effect. But Monica's words kept echoing in my mind. If something happens to her, you'll have to live with knowing you could have prevented it. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Detective Chen, the police officer who'd investigated Elise's missing person report. Detective Chen? This is Nick Harper. We spoke last week about my wife's missing person report. Mr. Harper, what can I do for you? I have information about a potential threat to my wife's safety. I explained about Brett's arrest, his pattern of behavior with ex-girlfriends, and his likely anger toward Elise for the investigation that had cost him his career. I kept it factual, restrained, careful not to dramatize anything. Are you requesting police protection for your wife? I'm requesting that someone check on her welfare periodically. She's made some poor choices, but she doesn't deserve to be hurt. We can increase patrols in her neighborhood and follow up on any reports of harassment or threats. That's all I'm asking. After hanging up, I realized I'd crossed a line I hadn't expected to cross. Despite everything Elise had done, despite the betrayal and lies and calculated deception, I still felt responsible for her safety. Maybe that made me weak. Or maybe it just made me different from the kind of man who abandons people to face dangerous consequences alone. Either way, I'd done what I could. The rest was up to her. The confrontation I'd been avoiding finally came on a rainy Thursday evening in late October, exactly 1 month after I'd vanished from Elise's life. I was reviewing structural calculations in my motel room when someone started pounding on my door with the kind of aggressive persistence that meant trouble. Through the peephole, I saw Brett Paxton standing in the hallway, soaking wet and obviously intoxicated. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. The confident lawyer had been replaced by something desperate and dangerous. "I know you're in there, Harper," he shouted, loud enough to wake other guests. "We need to talk." I didn't open the door. Instead, I called 911 and reported an intoxicated man threatening guests at the motel. Then I called Tim to document what was happening. "Don't engage with him," Tim advised. "Let the police handle it." "He's not going away." "He will when the cops arrive. Just stay inside and keep recording." I used my phone to record the audio of Brett's increasingly agitated demands. He alternated between threats and pleas, blaming me for his professional ruin and begging me to call off investigations that I'd never initiated. "Your wife destroyed my life," he shouted through the door. "The least you can do is face me like a man." "My wife destroyed your life?" I called back. "You destroyed your own life by having an affair with a subordinate employee." She came on to me. She pursued me. "I was trying to end it when you disappeared and made everything complicated." The revisionist history was breathtaking. Brett was rewriting the entire affair to make himself the victim of Elise's manipulation, rather than the predatory boss who'd seduced his employee. "That's not what her text messages say." "You read her messages?" I read enough. The pounding on the door intensified. "Open this door, you coward. Face me." I'm not the one hiding behind alcohol and making threats in a motel hallway. Police sirens were audible in the distance, growing closer. Brett must have heard them too, because his tone changed from aggressive to pleading. "Please, Harper, I lost everything. My job, my reputation, my future, all because your wife couldn't keep her mouth shut about our relationship. You lost everything because you made poor choices and got caught. She made me think she was leaving you. She said you didn't understand her, didn't appreciate her intelligence. She made me believe we had a future together." The police arrived with professional efficiency. Through the peephole, I watched 2 officers approach Brett with the careful attention they reserved for potentially dangerous situations. "Sir, we need you to step away from the door," one officer commanded. Brett's response was predictably belligerent. He was drunk, angry, and facing the complete collapse of his carefully constructed life. The officers handled him with practiced skill, de-escalating his aggression while making it clear that compliance wasn't optional. I opened my door when one officer knocked and identified himself. "Mr. Harper, I'm Officer Rodriguez. Are you the person who called about the disturbance?" "Yes. That man has been threatening me for the past 20 minutes. "Do you know him?" "He's my wife's former boss and former lover." Officer Rodriguez nodded with the weary expression of someone who'd seen every variation of domestic drama. "We're going to remove him from the premises. Do you want to press charges for harassment or trespassing?" I looked at Brett, who was now handcuffed and sitting in the back of a police car. He looked pathetic rather than threatening, a middle-aged man whose life had imploded because he couldn't control his impulses. "Not tonight. But I want this incident documented in case there are future problems." "Understood. We'll file a report and recommend that he stay away from this location." After the police left, I sat in my motel room and considered what had just happened. Brett's confrontation had been the desperate act of a man with nothing left to lose. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, and he was facing criminal charges that could result in jail time. More importantly, his appearance at my motel meant he'd been actively searching for me, which suggested a level of obsession that was genuinely concerning. I called Detective Chen and reported the incident, providing her with the police report number and expressing concern about Brett's escalating behavior. "We'll add this to his file," she assured me. "His bail conditions prohibit him from contacting you or your wife. This violation could send him back to jail." "What about my wife's safety?" "We've increased patrols in her neighborhood as you requested. So far, no incidents reported." That night, I had trouble sleeping. Brett's confrontation had brought the abstract consequences of the situation into sharp physical focus. This wasn't just about divorce proceedings and asset division anymore. It was about a dangerous man whose life had been destroyed by choices he refused to acknowledge as his own. The next morning, Tim called with an update on the legal proceedings. "The house sale is moving forward," he reported. "Elise's attorney is cooperating with the asset division negotiations. She seems to understand that fighting will only cost her money she doesn't have." "What's her financial situation?" "Difficult. Unemployment benefits won't cover her expenses, and her professional reputation makes finding new employment challenging. She's likely to accept whatever settlement we offer." "I don't want to destroy her financially." "You're not destroying her. You're just not rescuing her from the consequences of her own choices." That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Jimmy, my nephew at Virginia Tech. "Uncle Nick, I saw the news about Brett Paxton's arrest. Mom showed me the article in the Baltimore Sun." "It made the newspaper?" "Local attorney arrested for domestic violence and harassment. They didn't mention you by name, but they mentioned his affair with a paralegal whose husband had recently left her." The public exposure was more complete than I'd realized. Brett and Elise's affair was now a matter of public record, documented in police reports and newspaper articles that would follow them for years. "How's your aunt handling it?" "According to Mom, not well. She's been calling family members asking for money and places to stay. Nobody's offering much help." "Why not?" "Because everyone knows what she did now. Mom says the family group chat has been brutal. Lots of people saying she got what she deserved." The social consequences were spreading beyond Baltimore to include extended family and old friends. Elise's support network was collapsing as people learned the truth about her behavior. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. I drove to our old house, which was now under contract with new buyers. Elise's car was in the driveway, and lights were on in the kitchen. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, debating whether to go inside. The house represented 15 years of shared history, most of it good until the final months of deception and betrayal. Finally, I walked to the front door and used my key for what would probably be the last time. "Nick?" Elise's voice came from the kitchen, surprised and hopeful. "Hello, Elise." She appeared in the hallway, and the change in her appearance was striking. It took me a second to fully register that this was the same woman I'd lived with for over a decade. She'd lost weight, not in a healthy way, but in the way stress hollows people out from the inside. Her usually perfect hair was unkempt, pulled back without care, strands falling loose around her face. She looked older somehow, as if the last few months had compressed several years into her features. The confident woman who'd been conducting a secret affair had been replaced by someone who looked defeated, worn down by consequences she'd never truly believed would arrive. "I didn't think you'd ever come back here." Her voice was tentative, careful, like she was afraid even words might push me away. I studied the familiar walls, the framed photos still hanging where we'd left them, the faint scent of the house that used to be home. "I'm not back. I'm just visiting." We stood in the hallway of our former home, two people who'd once shared everything, meals, plans, fears, futures, and now shared nothing but legal obligations and painful history. The space between us felt wider than the narrow corridor allowed, filled with everything that had been said too late and done too carelessly. "Brett came to see you," she said. It wasn't a question. She was watching my face, gauging how much damage that visit had done. "Brett threatened me. There's a difference. He's not well. The arrest, losing his job, the newspaper article. He's falling apart. There was a flicker of guilt in her eyes, mixed with something that might once have been concern. That's not your responsibility anymore, isn't it? If I hadn't gotten involved with him. Her voice trailed off, searching for an alternate timeline where none of this had happened. If you hadn't gotten involved with him, he would have found someone else to manipulate. That's what men like him do. I didn't say it harshly. I didn't need to. The truth was sharp enough on its own. She nodded slowly. Monica warned me, his ex-wife. She called me after his arrest and told me about his pattern with other women. Why didn't you listen to her before? Because I thought I was different. I thought what we had was special. She laughed softly at herself, a sound with no humor left in it. What you had was an affair. Affairs aren't special, they're just secret. We moved to the living room and sat on opposite ends of the couch we'd chosen together when we still believed in forever. The cushions sagged slightly where we'd spent years side by side, watching movies, planning trips, talking about a future that no longer existed. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Sorry for having the affair, or sorry for getting caught. She considered the question for a long moment, staring at her hands. Both, but mostly sorry for lying to you for so long. You deserved better than that. Yes, I did. Can you ever forgive me? I looked around the room at the remnants of our shared life. Wedding photos still on the mantel. Vacation souvenirs from trips we'd taken when we still enjoyed each other's company. Furniture we'd chosen together when we thought we were building something permanent. It felt like walking through a museum exhibit of a life that no longer belonged to me. I can forgive you, I said finally. But I can't trust you. And without trust, there's no marriage. I know. Do you? Because for months you acted like you could have both. Me for security and stability, Brett for excitement and passion, like I was too stupid or too comfortable to notice. I never thought you were stupid. You thought I was manageable. There's a difference, but not much of one. She was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't try to hide or use for manipulation. They just fell, heavy and honest. What happens now? Now we get divorced. We divide our assets according to Maryland law. We move on with our separate lives. Will you be okay? The question surprised me with its apparent sincerity. I'll be fine. I have a good business, good friends, family who cares about me. I'll rebuild. I don't know how to rebuild. I don't know how to start over at 36 with no job and no reputation. You figure it out. That's what adults do when they make choices that have consequences. Will you help me? No. The finality of that single word seemed to settle something between us. For months, Elise had been able to count on my reliability, my willingness to fix problems and smooth over difficulties. That safety net was gone now, and she could feel it. I understand. Do you? Because understanding means accepting that your choices have permanently changed our relationship. I'm not your husband anymore. I'm not your friend. I'm not your safety net. I'm just someone you used to be married to. I know. I stood up to leave, and she followed me to the door, stopping just short of crossing the threshold with me. Nick? What? He means nothing to me now, Brett. He really means nothing to me anymore. I looked at her one last time, this woman I'd loved for 15 years and trusted completely until I couldn't. I know, I said, but now you mean nothing to me either. That's what you bought with your choices. I walked to my truck without looking back. Behind me, the house that had been our home was just another piece of real estate waiting for new owners who might have better luck with forever. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Elise moved to Richmond to live with a cousin while she looked for work. Brett plea bargained his criminal charges down to community service and probation, but the state bar suspended his license for 2 years. I bought a small house near the harbor and focused on building my engineering business. Bob and I landed several major contracts, and the future looked promising in ways it hadn't for years. Sometimes I wondered if Elise had found work, if she'd learned anything from the experience, if she ever thought about the choices that had cost her everything she'd claimed to value. But not often. I'd moved on to a life where other people's poor choices weren't my responsibility to fix, and that, I discovered, was exactly the life I'd been looking for all along.